Okay, we got the case of the giggles because we're not used to being on at night. We're morning people, but it is the first of the year, and I think Peyton was hungover. No, but we were up late. I can't believe I made it. Happy New Year, and we're going to discuss humility, and we promised you a fire, and our new technology didn't work to film in the other room, so we're back in the nest, and we'll be with you in just a minute. So I hope you all had a wonderful New Year and a great holiday, whether it was Christmas or Hanukkah or what have you, or anything. Or what was
Kwanzaa?
not Kwanzaa? What was the Seinfeld one?
Seinfeld? I forget.
Festivus.
Festivus.
Hope you had a wonderful Festivus. We are John and Peyton, and it looks like you're taking a new angle on art today. You like making a dragon.
A dragon.
Very cool. I had this. Well, it wasn't a conversation. I guess it was a conversation. It's in the modern style. So it was texting back and forth with an old friend, and she had been following online a little bit, and we haven't talked in decades, really, in a long time, and she was amazed at how different I was, or my ministry was, and she expressed, how did it come to this? Not like some people do, not like horrified, but curious, and I think also I wouldn't use the word impressed, but she was more happy about the changes than not. She said, "Well, all I remember from the past is that you were so certain." Oh, that's Kitty. We're babysitting a kitty. That's a new cat. She said, "You were so certain in the past." And I said, "Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest differences is I realized that wasn't really built on intellectual honesty. It was built on other things. It was kind of built into the evangelical background." Excuse me. I'm getting over a cold, but you're not contagious online. And I said, yeah, that was kind of the background I came out of, and it wasn't easy leaving that world, because certainty lends a great deal of comfort to it. You think you have the answers for everything, and if you're not quite certain in a couple places, you could probably just access your team of experts who wear the same colored jersey to find out that answer, whether it's buying a book from your church ministry that's 200 answers to atheist questions or something like that, or plugging in your umbilical cord to somebody you find intellectually attractive and letting them do their thinking for you, or looking to what your church says or your denomination says. Look at your girl in the back. She's on there. Is she checking out the carousel? Mm-hmm. Anyway, where was I? I'm goofing up already because it's late at night. So certainly I did come out of that world, and I thought to myself, one of my favorite quotes from Muhammad Ali actually is, "The man who views the world at 50 the same as he did at 20 has wasted 30 years of his life." So look, I don't know if you make New Year's resolutions. I don't know if you are comfortable enough to challenge the status quo, but I think spiritual growth comes in a place where we can be curious like children. Jesus said the kingdom of God is filled with childlike faith. And children ask so many questions, and they feel free to. They don't feel like they're going to be judged as, a weak faith, or they have no problem, pushing idols over, and they're this great hunger they have for learning. And I think this was the greatest breakthrough for me, is when I stopped challenging what other people think and I started challenging what I thought. And this was a process, of course, and some of it held up to scrutiny and some of it didn't, and I'm grateful for it, even though it was a scary process. But I agree with Ali. So here's something you might want to do if you're brave and if you're on this journey. You might want to ask yourself, in what areas or what questions do I think differently about now than I did when I was younger? And just if somebody asked you in an interview, what is something major that you've changed your mind about? I know some people would have a struggle answering that, because from the time they were in Sunday school till age 50, 60, 70, 80, they haven't changed their mind on anything major, anything of, say, spiritual consequence or political consequence, or something like that. And that, to me, shows an inflexibility that can only come from that kind of world where certainty exists, where it's almost an insult to God in that it's almost an omniscience that we claim. And I've said on a number of occasions, we just did a show recently about seeing through a glass darkly. It's amazing how some Christians will admit that God's ways are higher than our ways, and in many ways God is incomprehensible because he's omnipotent and infinite, and we're mortal and finite. Our intellect is way lower than his, and we see through a glass darkly when it comes to ultimate reality and wisdom and absolute truth. And yet then they will go on and tell you everything. They have an answer for everything. They act like they see God face to face, and they've had, they walked in the Garden of Eden with God, and he's actually spoken with them like Moses face to face or something like that. That's how they act, and so they're having it both ways. Do we see through a glass darkly, or are we certain about these things? Is that Freya, or is that you making all that noise? Look at Freya, she's cute. So, are we intellectually honest in our approach to things that are dear to us? Or is there a fear that keeps us in place, that keeps us in Plato's cave, seated next to our grandfathers and fathers, not willing to turn around, not willing to approach the mouth of the cave, but certain that the stories that we've been given about those dangerous shadows are true. So this was a big breakthrough for me. And I agree with Ali, the man who views the world at 50, the same as he did at 20, has wasted 30 years of his life. Now, I only want to give you 2 more points, and then we're going to look at Peyton's dragon. Daniel Aiken once said, and by the way, I'm going to quote 2 Christians here. So you're hearing, I quoted one Muslim, Muhammad Ali, although that's not Islamic truth. That's just human wisdom, right? What he's talking about, and it might be mentioned in the Quran. I don't know, but it's certainly wisdom that transcends that. It's about personal growth, really. Now I'm going to quote 2 Christians, and if you're not a Christian, again, these 2 things I think you'll find resonance with. This one is from Daniel Aiken. He's a theologian. He says that if your conception of God is radically false, then the more devout you are, the worse it will be for you. You are opening your soul to be molded by something base, and you had much better be an atheist. So, Daniel Aiken, if your conception of God is radically false, then the more devout you are, the worse it will be for you. You are opening your soul to be molded by something base, and you would much better be an atheist. Ironically, this is why oftentimes we see that the atheist has a better understanding of what God should look like than the theist. The Islamic God, who is capricious and often violent in some interpretations. The Christian God, who, frankly, is monstrous in some interpretations. In some elements of Calvinism, he's deterministic sadist. That's why atheists like to argue against the Calvinist God. But so there are versions of God that are so obviously ugly that oftentimes the atheist has a better view of God because he's not defending that. You know, many theists will defend versions of God that are completely untoward. And, you know, Christians who take exceptions to this, if they think about it deeply, you really can't, because you believe every God is a false God except for Yahweh. And there's a reason that people believe and celebrate and worship false gods, and you don't think that's healthy. And yet there are versions of the Christian God, and there are ideas about him, theologies, dogmas, doctrines about the Christian God that are not only just as off-putting, they're more off-putting, you know, based on if we truly believe that Jesus Christ is the fullness of the Godhead bodily, and then we defend things in parts of the Bible that are clearly contrary to the person and words of Jesus Christ. From the dicing up of concubine, or the offering of a daughter, or the slavery that's found in the Bible, to the patriarchy, to the genocide. We could go on and on about that. But Christians will end up defending these things, even though it makes God look smaller and uglier than the person and the words we see in Jesus Christ. So now, most Christians will even admit that this statement is true about other Christians. They won't say it about their own group, but they'd certainly say it about the Westboro Baptists. You know, they'll say those people, their conception of God is radically false, and their devotion to it makes them worse off. And Christians are embarrassed by this group. They're embarrassed by having to answer for them when it's pointed out that, well, they're part of the Baptist movement. So if this statement is true, and we know it is, because each of us has to admit that we don't understand divine truth 100%. And there's certainly things that we personally believe, or have believed, or will believe, that are not true of God. And the more adamant we are about it, I mean, if we celebrate it, if we worship these aspects that are incorrect, if we preach these truths, then we are actually anti-God. We are taking the Lord's name in vain. We aren't really celebrating his person, even though we're wearing the team jersey and carrying the big Bible and going to church. So, this brings up our topic for tonight, which is humility. It does take humility to question not only your own beliefs, but the beliefs of your peers, the beliefs you've grown up with, that which your father and your grandfather held dear. Now, there are places where most people will agree our parents, our grandparents, our great-grandparents weren't perfect. They might have held views that 100 years ago, 150 years ago, were considered not only the norm, but the status quo, or even healthy, and today are abhorrent. whether it's things about race or about our understanding of the complexity of sexuality, uh, or some kind of political questions. We all understand that. Even the most passionate patriot will not defend the fact that Jefferson and Washington owned slaves. They'll try and excuse it, maybe, but they certainly won't defend the practice. And that means we've grown. That means there's places that we wouldn't applaud in our family history, right? In our national history, in the history even of our own particular denominations or peculiar faith groups. And this is where I think humility requires us to hold up all that we hold dear, all that we think we've solved, and ask the question, what if I'm wrong? What if I'm wrong? Final quote is by one of my favorite guys, and he, if you find C.S. Lewis fascinating, you'll find out that there was somebody he revered as a mentor. And if you're familiar with the writings of C.S. Lewis and the writings of George MacDonald, you'll see a lot of places where C.S. Lewis is, to be generous, tipping his hat to George MacDonald, in some cases not plagiarizing him, but borrowing from him a great deal. And I don't say that as Lewis did anything nefarious, because he was the first to admit that in all of his writings, MacDonald's views and understanding of God played a major role in forming who Lewis was. George MacDonald was not a big fan of theology. As a matter of fact, he thought theologians had made a muck of it and really had turned more people away from God than had drawn them near. But he says this, he said, good souls, many, will one day be horrified at the things they now believe of God. They can make little progress in the knowledge of God while holding evil things true of him. It is most humbling. I'm in my 50s now, and to look back on some of the things I believed of God, even some of the things I taught about God, and now they fill me with regret or shame, remorse even. Because my view of God now, I would say, is so much richer, so much truer, I think, to the person of Christ. Having broken the chains of my previous convictions to really theologies and ideas of God that really didn't come from Jesus. They, in many ways, religion, including much of Christianity, is not the reflection of those made in the image of God, but it's the awful truth that more often than not, men frame God in their image. And so when I hear MacDonald say this, good souls many will one day be horrified at the things they now believe of God. Now, this will certainly be true when we are on the other side of heaven, right? When we stand like Isaiah did in front of a holy God and we realize how little we thought of him, how pitiful was our understanding of him, what a waste of time it was to argue, as Lewis would say, we'd be content making mud pies than having a great vacation by the seashore. That's how small we think about divine things. And I think we will all, when we stand in front of God, realize, much like the prodigal son, that even our best thoughts of him fell so short of the magnanimity of the grace and of the love of God our Father. So that's, are you close?
I'm done.
You're done. So that's what I want to leave you with today. So if you want to challenge yourself along on this journey, if you have the courage to do this, ask yourself a few questions this year and keep a journal. Keep a spiritual journal. You don't have to share it with anyone. You don't have to share it with your pastor or your youth leader or your parents or your spouse. You could keep this between you and God. You could keep a spiritual journey where you ask these questions, these difficult questions. And the first one to ask is, have I changed my mind about anything significant over...
Mom's watching us.
Oh.
What?
Are you ratting her out?
What do you want?
Is the volume not good?
She's like trying to whisper to me,
she's
but
probably
I don't
saying,
know what she's saying.
She's probably telling us the volume's not good or something. We'll find out in a moment. But
text us.
Well, what I was gonna.
Know what she's saying.
Okay. Let's wrap it up.
Saying.
So, ask yourself if you've changed your mind about anything significant. Now, Peyton wants to do a whole. You want to do a whole series of shows with me and you where we deconstruct my old articles, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, she's pretty vicious. So she reads some of my old articles. She does laugh, but she feels guilty about it. And then she says, "Dad, you were a real Christian nationalist." But ask yourself, have you changed your mind about anything significant? This is kind of a gauge of humility. This is kind of a warning sign, too, if you haven't. It's kind of like a thermometer for, a spiritual fever that we may have if we haven't. The next thing to ask, and this is a really important question, you need to be sincere about this one, is what if I'm wrong? And then you have to have the courage to follow that up. And we're going to talk about that next week. How do you follow up that question, what if I'm wrong? All right. Poe, where are we going here? You seem to be distracted.
No, I'm just...
So, do you want me to go full screen on that? You want me to go to this screen?
Do this, the main camera.
All right. That's this.
No, the other one.
The other one. That's
we can
this.
do this.
Okay.
I made two. This is in...
That's the camera.
Is it here?
Right here.
Okay.
All right.
This is an ice one.
It's an ice one or a nice one?
Ice.
That's an ice dragon?
Yeah. Like in Game of Thrones where Daenerys' dragon dies by the White Walkers.
Yes. And what's this
This
one?
is a sea dragon.
Like an Avatar? Or
no?
Or those who are dragons? Okay.
No.
A sea dragon. I don't know. I haven't seen the new Avatar.
I have.
So you've got a whole book of dragons.
I've made 3. I don't have my other one with me.
Okay. Wonderful. You got anything to say about it?
And they're like paper planes. You could throw them.
Why don't you throw one at Freya? Don't scare her, but throw one. Okay. See.
I'm not good at throwing.
Don't throw it at her. Oh, that was pretty good actually.
She's not scared.
All right, folks. Thanks for joining us. I hope you've had a wonderful New Year. We'll see you soon.
She's smelling them. I think she likes it.